Swallowing an Oyster Alive by John S. Robb. At a late hour the other night, the door of an oyster house in our city was thrust open, and in stalked a hero from the Sucker State. He was quite 6 feet high, spare, somewhat stooped, with a hungry, anxious countenance, and his hands pushed clear down to the bottom of his breeches pockets. His outer covering was hard to define, but after surveying it minutely, we came to the conclusion that his suit had been made in his boyhood of a dingy yellow linsey-woolsey, and that, having sprouted up with astonishing rapidity, he had been forced to piece it out with all colors in order to keep pace with his body. In spite of his exertions, however, he had fallen in arrears about a foot of the necessary length, and consequently stuck that far through his inexpressibles. His crop of hair was surmounted by the funniest little sealskin cap imaginable. After taking a position, he indulged in a long stare at the man opening the bivalves, and slowly ejaculated, "Oysters?" "Yes, sir," responded the attentive operator, "and fine ones they are, too." "Well, I've heard of oysters afore," says he, "but this is the first time I seed 'em, and perhaps I'll know what they're made of before I get out of town." Having expressed this desperate intention, he cautiously approached the plate and scrutinized the uncased shellfish with a gravity and interest which would have done honor to the most illustrious searcher into the hidden mysteries of nature. At length, he began to soliloquize on the difficulty of getting them out and how queer they looked when out. "I never seed anything hold on so. Takes an amazin' sight of screwing, hoss, to get them out. And ain't they slick and slippery when they does come? Smooth as an eel. I got a good mind to give that feller lodgin' just to realize the effects, as Uncle Jess used to say about speculation." "Well, sir," was the reply, "down with 2 bits, and you can have a dozen." "2 bits!" exclaimed the sucker. "Now come, that's sticking it on right strong, hoss, for oysters. A dozen on 'em ain't nothing to a chicken, and there's no getting more'n a picayune apiece for them. I've only realized 45 picayunes on my first venture to St. Louis. I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2 chickens for a dozen if you'll conclude the deal." A wag who was standing by, indulging in a dozen, winked to the attendant to shell out, and the offer was accepted. "Now mind," repeated the sucker, "all fair. 2 chickens for a dozen. You're a witness, mister," turning at the same time to the wag. "None of your tricks, for I've heard that your city fellers are mighty slippery coons." The bargain being fairly understood, our sucker squared himself for the onset. Deliberately put off his sealskin, tucked up his sleeves, and, fork in hand, awaited the appearance of number 1. It came. He saw, and quickly it was bolted. A moment's dreadful pause ensued. The wag dropped his knife and fork with a look of mingled amazement and horror, something akin to Shakespeare's Hamlet on seeing his daddy's ghost, while he burst into the exclamation, "Swallowed alive, as I'm a Christian!" Our sucker hero had opened his mouth with pleasure a moment before, but now it stood open. Fear, a horrid dread of he didn't know what, a consciousness that all wasn't right, and ignorant of the extent of the wrong, the uncertainty of the moment was terrible. Urged to desperation, he faltered out, "What on earth's the row?" "Did you swallow it alive?" inquired the wag. "I swallowed it just as he gin it to me," shouted the sucker. "You're a dead man," exclaimed his anxious friend. "The creature is alive and will eat right through you," added he in a most hopeless tone. "Get a pison pump and pump it out!" screamed the sucker in a frenzy, his eyes fairly starting from their sockets. "Oh, gracious, what'll I do? It's got hold of my innards already, and I'm dead as a chicken. Do something for me, do! Don't let the infernal sea toad eat me afore your eyes!" "Why don't you put some of this on it?" inquired the wag, pointing to a bottle of strong pepper sauce. The hint was enough. The sucker, upon the instant, seized the bottle and, desperately wrenching out the cork, swallowed half the contents at a draught. He fairly squealed from its effect, and gasped and blowed and pitched and twisted as if it were coursing through him with electric effect, while at the same time his eyes ran a stream of tears. At length, becoming a little composed, his waggish adviser approached, almost bursting with suppressed laughter, and inquired, "How are you now, old fella? Did you kill it?" "Well, I did, hoss. Ooh, my innards! If that Oyster critter's dying agonies didn't stir a ruption in me equal to a small earthquake, then 'tain't no use saying it. It squirmed like a serpent when that killing stuff touched it. Ooh!" And here, with a countenance made up of suppressed agony and present determination, he paused to give force to his words, and slowly and deliberately remarked, "If you get 2 chickens from me for that live animal, I'm derned." And seizing his sealskin, he vanished.